95,000 pesos. Now, back in 2005, you have to understand that was an absolute fortune for an everyday Filipino worker. I mean, for a lot of folks, scraping together that kind of cash meant literally emptying out their life savings. It meant taking out these massive, high-interest loans and basically betting absolutely everything they had on just one single promise: the chance at a better life working overseas. But what actually happens when that money and that dream are handed over to exactly the wrong people? Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am so incredibly glad you're here today. We are going to unpack a truly fascinating and honestly pretty heartbreaking Philippine Supreme Court case. It's People versus Cecile Amasara and Jose L. Centeno. We're going to use this specific case as a sort of masterclass, right? To break down exactly how these overseas employment scams operate in the real world, how the Philippine justice system actually classifies these crimes, and the incredibly meticulous math the courts use to try and make these victims whole again. So grab your notes because we have a lot of ground to cover today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the stolen dreams of the victims, then we'll define illegal recruitment, look at the overlapping crime of estafa, examine a really fascinating legal defense by an employee, see how a brand new law modified the penalties, and then finally we'll calculate the exact financial damages. Section 1. The overseas dream stolen. You know, every single legal case starts with a human story, and ours begins in late 2005. Hopeful applicants, people like Ruben, Elizabeth, and Ravilla, walked right into the Manila office of a place called Frontline Manpower Resources and Placement Company. They were greeted by the company president, Cecile Amarada, and her associate, Jose Centeno. Ruben and Elizabeth, they were promised these really lucrative jobs as a waiter and a caregiver over in Canada. Ravilla was promised a chambermaid position in Australia. So by early 2006, running entirely on these promises, Ruben and Elizabeth each handed over 95,000 pesos in placement fees. Ravilla paid 75,000 pesos. And they were given really specific deployment dates. We're talking August 16th and August 24th of 2006. But as you might guess, August came and went, the dates were pushed back, then eventually they were just canceled entirely. And the money? It was never returned. No way. So, by February 2008, the state finally stepped in, and formal criminal charges, which are known as informations, were filed in court against these recruiters. Moving on to Section 2, defining illegal recruitment. Okay, so let's put on our law school hats for a second. Under Philippine law, specifically the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act, you absolutely cannot recruit workers for overseas employment without a proper license from the POEA. And guess what? Frontline Manpower did not have this license. None at all. So right off the bat, that is illegal recruitment. But the law actually escalates the severity of this crime based on exactly how it's pulled off. When illegal recruitment is carried out by a group of 3 or more persons acting together in a conspiracy, it gets legally classified as being committed by a syndicate. In our case, Amara, Centeno, and a few other accomplices were all working together as a team. They each played a part in selling this illusion, and that makes it a syndicated crime. Furthermore, the law also looks very closely at the sheer number of victims. If the illegal recruitment targets 3 or more persons, it is classified as large-scale. Now, think back to our victims, Ruben, Elizabeth, and Ravilla. That is exactly 3 people, right? Because the prosecution successfully proved that these 3 specific individuals were scammed, the crime automatically hit the threshold for large-scale illegal recruitment. So here is the absolutely crucial point to remember. When illegal recruitment is committed by a syndicate or on a large scale, the law elevates the whole thing to economic sabotage. The state is basically saying, look, this isn't just a crime against one person. It's a crime against the entire economy. And the penalty? It is incredibly severe. We're talking life imprisonment plus a massive fine of 500,000 pesos per count. And because there were multiple charges here, Centeno was actually sentenced to life imprisonment multiple times over. Section 3. Estafa, the swindle. Now, if you are fairly new to criminal law, this next part is just fascinating. Centeno wasn't just charged with illegal recruitment, he was simultaneously charged with estafa. And this brilliantly illustrates a really unique feature of the Philippine legal system. You can actually be convicted of 2 entirely separate crimes for the exact same physical act. Think about it. Illegal recruitment is a violation of special labor laws. It's punishing the act of recruiting without government permission. Estafa, on the other hand, is a violation of the revised penal code. It punishes the fraud, the swindle itself, the actual deceit. The Supreme Court has ruled over and over again that a conviction for one definitely does not bar a conviction for the other. They are completely independent offenses. So let's break down exactly what makes a scam estafa. To get a conviction, the prosecution has to prove four distinct elements. First, there has to be a false pretense of power, meaning the recruiters falsely claim they actually had the capacity to send these people to Canada and Australia. Second, this specific lie must be made prior to or simultaneous with the actual fraud. Third, and this is key, the victim must actually rely on that specific lie to hand over their money. Like if they knew it was a total scam and paid anyway, well, it wouldn't be estafa. But Rubin, Elizabeth, and Ravilla completely believed the lie. And finally, the victim must suffer damage, which, of course, is the lost placement fees. This fake agency checked every single one of those boxes perfectly.
Section 4. The Employee Defense.
So picture this. When the whole scam inevitably collapsed, the agency president, Cecile Amara, just vanished into thin air. Only Jose Centeno was actually arrested and put on trial. And his defense? Honestly, it's incredibly common in these types of cases. He claimed he was merely a low-level employee, just a guy doing his job. He literally told the court he was hired for a 30,000 peso monthly salary, plus a $100 commission per applicant, money which, by the way, he claimed he never even received. He argued he had absolutely no part in the conspiracy, didn't really talk to the applicants, and was basically just a victim of his boss disappearing. So think about it. How do you think the Supreme Court viewed this kind of defense?
Well, the court completely dismantled it. And they did it by looking directly at his specific documented actions. The Supreme Court basically said, look, you do not need to be the evil mastermind to be part of a criminal syndicate. You just need to perform acts that contribute to the common fraudulent goal. And the evidence? It showed Centeno actively misrepresented the existence of that Australian agency. He personally processed the applications. He was the one telling applicants exactly who to pay. He was the guy handing out the fake departure schedules. He even issued a signed certification promising Ravilla her chambermaid slot. The court ruled that these were not the actions of some clueless innocent bystander. These were the concerted, deliberate actions of a co-conspirator working hard to give victims the false impression of a totally legitimate agency. So yeah, his conviction was strongly upheld.
Section 5. Modifying the penalties. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the dramatic legal plot twist that happened while this whole case was up on appeal. Originally, Centeno was sentenced by the trial court to up to 15 years in prison for each and every count of estafa, and that's on top of his life sentences for the illegal recruitment. But then the Philippine Congress stepped in and passed Republic Act 10951. This new law essentially adjusted the value of property and damage that criminal penalties are based on. It was basically adjusting the law for decades of economic inflation. Under the old law, stealing 95,000 pesos triggered a genuinely massive penalty. But under the new law, that threshold shifted, which significantly reduced the penalty for that specific dollar amount. And here's the kicker. Because penal laws in the Philippines are applied retroactively if they happen to be favorable to the accused, the Supreme Court actually had to reduce Centeno's estafa sentences. So instead of up to 15 years, his maximum penalty for each estafa count dropped down to just 1 year and 8 months.
Section 6. Calculating the damages. Let's talk about the money. Criminals don't just go to jail, right? They are legally obligated to pay back what they stole. But the law doesn't just demand the principal amount, it demands interest. And to figure out that exact interest rate, the Supreme Court has to classify exactly what kind of financial transaction took place here. Is a stolen placement fee a forbearance of money like a typical loan, or is it a payment for a service? Well, the court ruled it is unequivocally a payment for a service. These victims were not lending the agency money, they were paying them to process documents and actually secure them jobs. Because it's a service payment, and because the exact stolen amounts were so clearly established right there in the complaint, the interest clock starts ticking the very moment the victims make a formal judicial demand. So let's see how this all builds into the actual math, which is guided by a really famous piece of Philippine legal precedent known as the NACAR case. It's essentially a timeline. Because the information was officially filed in court on February 11, 2008, the court treats that date as the judicial demand. From that exact date, the stolen 95,000 pesos begins earning 12% interest per year. Now, why 12%? Simply because that was the standard legal rate at that specific time. But then, on July 1, 2013, the Bangko Sentral and Pilipinas, the central bank, stepped in and actually lowered the legal interest rate for these types of damages down to 6%. So the court, being incredibly meticulous, calculated 12% interest from 2008 all the way to June 2013, and then dropped it to 6% from July 2013 until the date the Supreme Court decision becomes totally final. And from that finality date onward,
It just continues to earn 6% every single year until Centennial pays back every last cent. It's a highly rigorous formula, but it's specifically designed to protect the economic value of the victim's money over what can be years and years of lengthy litigation.
We have covered a lot of really complex legal ground today, from the strict definitions of syndicated recruitment all the way to the retroactive application of penal laws. But I really want to leave you with a practical thought before we go. The law can absolutely punish recruiters, and it can calculate interest on damages all day long, but as we just saw, actually getting that money back after the scammers disappear, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. Prevention is absolutely always better than a cure. So I have to ask you, how can you definitively verify if a recruitment agency is truly licensed by the government before handing over your life savings? Luckily, in today's digital age, the Department of Migrant Workers maintains online databases where you can instantly check the status of any agency or recruiter out there. So please, don't just trust a fancy office. Don't just trust a really convincing employee. Verify that license. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused out there, and I will see you next time.